All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. My name is Julia Jacobs. I am a policy associate here at Groundwork, Ohio. And today I will be talking to you about advocacy and communications and how to bolster your voice. So a little bit about Groundwork here. So we are a nonpartisan public policy research and advocacy organization. We formed in 2004 around the preschool movement and have since really expanded our horizon to a whole child approach spanning from the prenatal age to age 5. We do this because we know that the early years are critical in laying a strong groundwork for future success for our youngest learners. And we do this by mobilizing many stakeholders across the state. And many of you I see in the crowd today, I know I have engaged with in the past as well. So it's nice to see so many familiar attendees and some new attendees today in the crowd. First, I kind of want to just know who's in the crowd today. So if you can put in the chat box your name, your role, and if you've ever participated in advocacy, and if you have, if you can just briefly share how you've participated, I would greatly appreciate it. And then throughout today's conversation, if you have any questions, feel free to add your questions to the chat box, and I'll do my best to monitor them and answer them as I go. So today's learning objectives will define advocacy, we'll understand what opportunities exist to advocate, we'll explore the different messages and tools that you can use to advocate for the workforce and how to practice effective advocacy, and then finally commit to staying engaged. So first, I'm going to start with defining advocacy. So advocacy is an activity by an individual or group which aims to influence decisions within political, economic, and social systems and institutions. While most of our training today will focus on statewide advocacy, we know that many of these tools and strategies can be easily translated to local policy, businesses, and more. And I see everyone's names coming in. Thank you. Today we'll be mainly focusing on state level advocacy, but it's important to note that advocacy can take place at the local, state, and federal levels, and all have very similar roles and functions within them. So for instance, throughout the pandemic, Groundwork has focused a lot of its efforts on federal advocacy due to stimulus budget negotiations, but during the spring, we shifted our focus to the state budget process and participated in advocacy through that way. So you'll see on the slide, I have Columbus City Hall, the State House, and US Congress. So just making sure that everyone understands there's these different levels of government that you can participate in advocacy. So within each of these different levels of government, you have some really basic structures. You have the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. So in the legislative branch, we see this is where laws are created. So in the State House, this is our Ohio House of Representatives, and in the Senate, it's our Ohio senators. Then our executive branch carries out the laws. So think the governor, the different agencies that the governor oversees, and different statewide positions as well, such as the Attorney General and Secretary of State, et cetera. And then finally, we also have the judicial branch, which then interprets and enforces the laws that are passed and carried out. So anytime there's any questions around the legality of laws or how that should be implemented, we see that in our Ohio Supreme Court and US Supreme Court as well. So in total, though, we have in the legislative branch in Ohio, we really focus on a lot of our efforts there. But we have 2 chambers, just like Congress, with 99 representatives and 33 senators. I can put in the chat box later a Find Your Legislator tool. So you're able to find your legislator and figure out who represents you at the State House. And I'm going to share a video. Okay, hold on. A video that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but it's always a good one. So let me just put this in my browser real quick.
Relationship. New magical sets out now. Sets sold separately.
Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Thank you all for sitting with me through that video. I know that many of you are probably very familiar with it, but it's a nice reminder of how the process works in terms of passing a bill through the legislature. And all right, there we go. All right, so as you saw, a bill starts out as an idea. It goes through the committee process, eventually voted through the legislature, and then onto the president or the governor for final say of whether or not they would want to accept the bill or veto it. And from there, there's a whole process as well. So next, I'm going to get into practicing effective advocacy. So it's important when you're communicating your story and your ask, you know, how you're telling the story and how it's getting across is really important to consider. So the secret ingredients to doing this correctly is by having a clearly articulated issue or challenge, compelling evidence to support your proposed solution, a personal connection to the issue, and targeted messaging. I also wanted to put in there as well that while data is important to creating a strong case, the most important thing you can share with policymakers is why you are passionate about the issue. So adding that personal connection and sharing how this issue has impacted you and the families you serve can really transform their views on the issue that you're going to be presenting to them. So you must begin with first understanding the issues. So given that you're all early childhood education professionals, you know these issues, you live these issues day in and day out. Your story is the most compelling story to share. However, you can amplify your story even more by presenting data that demonstrates how you are not alone in the issues you are experiencing. So back in the fall of 2020, Groundwork released a new report on advancing the workforce behind the workforce. And within this report, we presented a clear picture of Ohio's early childhood education professionals in the childcare settings and identifies ways that Ohio can better support the profession in providing high quality early learning experiences for our youngest children. This report explored state level data gathered through the professional registry. And so the next few slides, I'm going to go through some of those data points, but I'll be sure to share the report in the chat box. So with that, we're going to jump in. So we need to first start with who are Ohio's early childhood professionals working in childcare settings. So we know that although this data is from last year, so I know it has changed since as a result of the pandemic, but we know that for the most part, the profession is predominantly female. As you can see, 95% of childcare professionals are female. The median age is 37. And as you can see in the education, a majority have a high school diploma. However, there's a good number of professionals who have beyond a high school diploma as well. So understanding who the professionals are is critical when you're demonstrating this data. In addition to the workforce being primarily women, the workforce is also disproportionately women of color, particularly Black women. For far too long, early childhood education professionals have worked near poverty wages and without benefits, even as they've continued to build their competencies and credentials. So understanding that current policy reflects the deep impact of racism and other systemic inequities, which are pervasive in our childcare system. So demonstrating that in your story is also a great way to bolster your story and demonstrating that this is across the state as well, and when you're advocating for the profession. And it's also important to demonstrate what early childhood educational professionals do. So I don't have to go through these because I know that you all live in it, but just demonstrating to policymakers why early education professionals, what their day-to-day experiences are is critically important. I think a lot of the times public policy makers are so far from this. They often have older children, or they are not dealing with children in early education, so they're very removed from it. So demonstrating why early childhood educational professionals are more than just babysitters, as we have seen throughout the past year that term thrown around, but demonstrating that you are more than that, and you are you deserve more than what is currently on the table. So showing them how you are highly skilled, highly trained, and highly qualified to deal with children is really important while you're creating your message. And it's also important to understand what the current challenges of the profession are, and sharing that with legislators as well. So there's three big areas that we highlight in the report, but these three big areas include poor staff compensation, challenges finding degreed and credentialed staff, and high turnover rates. So despite the important role we know that early education professionals play in laying the foundation for early learning, for setting kids up for success, and for supporting working families, our early childhood educators face a whole host of challenges. So continue building that message as well while you're advocating. And we know that this turnover is really disruptive to a lot of the young children who are being cared for in these settings as well. And then ultimately, improving Ohio's early ed system requires significant investments in programs. We know that money can't solve everything, but we know that it's essential in creating an efficient, high quality system that serves those who need it the most. We're not asking for a bigger slice of the pie. We are asking, however, for just a bigger pie overall. So there's a real message here that, you know, we could be doing better in this space in Ohio. As you can see, early childhood receives a fraction of the funding here in Ohio. So now that we understand many of the issues faced by the early childhood education workforce, we need to be able to prove that it's worth investing in and supporting here in Ohio. So first, it's important to understand the role early educators play in supporting brain development for Ohio's youngest learners. While we know parents and caregivers are a child's first teacher, early educators are the next line of defense in preparing our future workforce. So I'm sure many of you all already know this, but one way to do that is talking about the brain development and the impact early educators have on children and preparing them for future success. So there's a ton of research on how important early education is in the first 5 years of life. So we know that brains are built, not born, and that every child is born with the capacity to reach his or her full potential. So during those first few years of life, that foundation is laid. And that's when we see some of the greatest periods of brain development in a child's life. So when we don't have that quality early education experience in the first few years, it really impacts the ability for that brain architecture to form like it's expected to. And we see that over time as we see that children who start behind their peers really stay behind their peers. So we see these large gaps beginning in kindergarten. And then by this time, the disadvantaged children have already fallen 2 years behind their more advantaged peers. So, and it's really hard, as you see in this graph, to then close that achievement gap. So that those first years of life, really having that quality education can help lessen this achievement gap and possibly even eliminate it altogether if done correctly. But we know beyond just the brain science, we know that investing early really works for our youngest children. So there's been a lot of research that has shown us that kids who receive that quality early childhood experience in the first few years of life are more likely to be kindergarten ready, graduate high school, have higher earnings and better health, and less likely to be held back a grade, be reliant on public assistance, engage in criminal behavior. We also know that kids who start behind stay behind, like I had mentioned earlier, but this is really important context here too, because if kids are not starting ahead and continuing to grow, then later on, we are going to have a really significant workforce crisis, as you've seen on the screen. So it's critical that those first few years of life, we really get that quality early education in, so that we can have more children come to kindergarten ready to learn, which in turn will hopefully boost the number of children graduating high school and going on to get a degree or credential to get them into the workforce. So all this to say is that early educators play a really important role throughout this whole entire process. So demonstrating to legislators why this is not just a workforce issue within the early learning programs, but it's beyond that. This really impacts the future workforce as well. So supporting the workforce that is taking care of these young children now will hopefully in turn yield a high return on investment later on, because children will be more prepared and be more successful. And then lastly, always add a personal connection to the advocacy that you're doing. So understanding why you are advocating for quality early learning. Is it to help the families you serve? Is it to improve the outcomes for your own kids, or to more effectively promote or provide quality early learning? So what is the most important thing that you can share with policymakers, and why you are passionate about this issue? So really sharing that personal connection tied with the data and the larger story as well. And you will have a very strong case for support in advancing this issue. And hopefully in turn, legislators will be more likely to invest in the workforce. And I see there's a question. Oh, Belinda, thank you. So when you start beginning to advocate, you have to determine your ask, support your case, learn more about your legislators, and prepare for your meeting. So once again, I just want to point out that your stories matter so much, and that legislators are there for you. They represent their constituents, and you are their constituents. So while it's easy to find yourself nervous to reach out and meet with policymakers, try not to be. I know that's harder than said than done, but like I said, they're there for you and they need to hear directly from you. They've been in positions before being a policymaker. They're not just solely policymakers, and they've been in the community. They understand. So just understanding that they're there for you and they're just like any of us, hopefully will help settle your nerves and to getting into the space and advocating with the policymakers. So first and foremost, I want to just share how to address your policymakers. So I know this is sometimes a little confusing and challenging because in Congress, we see people referred to as Congress members or congressional members. And then the state house, we really refer to them as representatives or senators, and it's confusing. So I will have these slides available for you afterwards, but just wanted to demonstrate on this slide real quickly some tips on how to refer to the legislators you're speaking to. So like I said, referring to the U.S. House of Representatives, anyone who's in that as congressman, man or woman, and Ohio House of Representatives, we really just, we're a little more formal and just call them representatives or senators. And then lastly, when you address a letter, we always use in the address block, the Honorable Julia Jagels, for instance. You wouldn't say the Honorable Senator, whatever their name is, just use their honorable first and last name and then dear Senator blank. But I'll share this with you all afterwards so that you can get familiar with it. But I also want to just say, don't get too hung up on it. It's okay to make mistakes. So before reaching out to your legislator, it's important to do some brief background research to figure out who they are and what issues they care about. This will help you in developing your angle on how you want to communicate your issues. So have they supported or opposed any ECE legislation in the past? What committees do they sit on? And what influence could they have during the budget? So I'm going to pop in the chat box right now a link for you all. I'm going to share this real quick. Okay, so if you all could just go to the link that I posted in the chat box. This is really good practice, and I'll show you how to go about it. But in the link, you'll be able to figure out who represents you by going down and scrolling to the bottom right here. And you can just put in your address right here. And you'll be able to search and see who represents you. So I just put in our office address. So yeah, as you'll see, Representative Allison Russo represents the area I'm currently in, and Senator Stephanie Coonsey. So from there, you'll be able to click on their profile and you'll be able to go in and read the biography, read any news, any legislation, what committees they are. This is a really good opportunity to get to know them before actually meeting them. So as you can see here, you can see there's a lot of, she's been in a lot of school settings and it seems to be very supportive of early learning. So, and then you can go into the committees and look to see what committees she sits on, as well as different legislation that she's supporting or sponsoring. So all this to say is make sure that before you meet with your legislators to get to know them through using that tool, because it will be helpful in preparing you for your meeting. But once you do it, if you can just put in the chat box who your legislator is, I'm just curious to see if you have any issues in finding it or who your legislators are.
Julia, as they're doing that, just curious as far as, a lot of our work-related items are early childhood pieces. So if we live in one district, but yet work in another that we're representing our early childhood thoughts, is there a best practice on how to approach that?
That's a good question. I've been asked that many times before, and I think that always I would, since you work in early childhood, I would say talk to your legislator because they want to know where their constituents work and what they do. But also, if you're representing your organization and you're going out into advocacy to talk about your organization, so let's say you're an owner of a child care center and you want to talk about an issue that's impacting you, I would also tap in to that legislator who's in that district. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. I see some people putting in the chat box. Okay. So now this is the next step, is determining what your ask is. So if you're meeting with any policymakers, they will automatically assume you're going to go in having an ask. So what are you asking them to do? What can they do to support young children? Like what different supports can they provide to you in the State House? So depending on the time of year, there might be different legislation that will impact you, such as throughout the beginning of this year, we had the state budget going on, where we saw a lot of different changes in our early education system. So that's a really interesting time of year to participate. This happens every 2 years. It's always an odd number year, but the state budget is critically important in setting a lot of different investments and policies and procedures for the next 2 years. So we won't have this process again until 2023. But that will come soon enough. It always does. So start thinking about that. However, there's other opportunities outside of the budget that you can also advocate on. Right now, for instance, I know that there's a bill in the Ohio House to increase income eligibility limits for childcare. From now, we're at 142% as a result of the budget. But this bill, it's House Bill 145, would increase it to 200% of the federal poverty level. So there's all kinds of different opportunities to advocate in the State House. And one of them that's coming up is the Legislative Study Committee that will be really looking at our quality early education system as a whole. And more on that later, but definitely I'll provide some information on the end and how to engage with groundwork, as we'll provide updates as that process goes along, and there will be plenty of opportunities to plug in. But when you are determining an ask, it's important to be clear, specific, and measurable. So clear meaning don't just go around the issue make sure that you are just abundantly clear on what you are asking for. So can you please expand childcare eligibility, for instance? Don't try to go around the issue, just be very direct and honest with them. So being specific, so say exactly what you want. So if you want them to support something, say, please vote on this, please don't vote on this. And then measurable. So be sure that whatever you ask, you can determine whether or not they followed through with the ask. So, when you put the ask out there, like making sure that you can go back and look to see if something was done on it. And then outlining your elevator pitch. So before you go and meet with your legislator, it's helpful to practice your pitch at home or with your colleagues. So legislators are often on super tight, busy schedules. They have a lot of constituent meetings. They're bouncing around from hearing to hearing, going to the sessions and many other things. So they are on a tight timeline. So often you only have 15 to 30 minutes to chat with them. So in that 15 to 30 minutes, it's important to narrow down your message to get straight to the issue and the ask. You can practice these tips on the screen before your meeting and you'll be set up for success once you do. So, understanding what the issue you would like addressed, why it's worth making a priority, and adding your personal story or connection. Normally we would do breakout rooms for this. So I was just wondering if, we can give a minute or two to see if people would be willing to just briefly introduce themselves and your little elevator speech within like 2 to 3 sentences, if that's okay. I think it's a really good practice to do, and I don't want to take away this time. So just pop it in the chat box. And then also, if you have any questions on your elevator pitch as well while you're typing, feel free to add it to the chat box. And I'll give it another minute. Okay, so while you all are typing, I'll go on to the next slide real quick. Okay, so there's lots of ways you can advocate beyond just a meeting even. Okay, I see you, Karen. So my name is Karen. I'm an assistant professor of early childhood education. We need to find resources to support higher pay for early childhood educators. Their work sets the foundation of success for children in early schooling and beyond. Yes, it is hard to do, but I think you did a good job of getting straight to the point. And normally, like I said, we would do this in a breakout room setting because it's a really good practice and activity to do. But today we'll have to kind of keep it short in the chat box. So keep thinking on it, or as you're thinking on it, if you have questions on how to be effective in your elevator speech, please put it in the chat box and we can talk through it. So there's different ways that you can advocate. So of course, there's meeting with policymakers. You can also host a site visit. You can write a letter to your policymakers. You can write an op-ed, and you can always use social media as well. So we'll go through each of these options and talk about the benefits, the time commitment, and some tips and tricks before, having opportunity for questions and answers as well. So first, there's engaging on social media. I know many of you have engaged on social media before through the groundwork page and other avenues. But this is a really quick and easy way to get your advocacy out there without spending a whole lot of time on doing it. So a lot of legislators are on Twitter, and I know most people are on Facebook or other social media platforms, but a lot of the time policymakers are on Twitter, and it's far more easy to see different tweets and everything else on Twitter versus on Facebook because of privacy settings and other issues as well. So so over the pandemic, we saw a large increase in social media activity through sharing of articles and reaching out to legislators and everything else. And I think it's done a really great job in making sure that early childhood is front and center for many policymakers in Ohio. And I see Molly put in the chat box as well. Hi, my name is Molly. I am asking you to reform your eligibility for childcare to ensure all children have access to quality care and education. This issue is important to me because data clearly links positive outcomes for quality care. Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good beginning statement. And I wish like I said, we could do it more actively in group participation right now, but I think you did a great job of getting right to the point. So some social media tips to consider as you post on social media is to always be careful of being critical of policymakers. I know oftentimes it's really easy to get frustrated around policies and practices, but being critical of policymakers online will probably more often than not shut them out instead of invite them in. So making sure that you are not necessarily complimenting them or going above and beyond and really being fake or anything like that. But what I'm saying is make sure that you're not calling them out and being mean or negative towards a policymaker due to a certain vote or a certain position. Instead, be a little more friendly and they're more likely to engage with you. Like I said, Twitter is the most effective tool. You can always tag your policymakers and post as well. On that link I sent you earlier, many of the bio pages have links to their Twitter pages and their Facebook pages. So you're able to tag them in the post that you make. And if you can't find it on their website, I'm sure you can go into the search bar on Twitter and find them that way as well. Using images or different resources to back up your claim is also really easy and effective as well. So I know recently there was a whole Dayton Daily News series on why childcare is important, for instance, and a lot of different legislators were able to see that and engage in that process as well. And then when appropriate, add hashtags to increase visibility. So I know that throughout the pandemic, one of the biggest hashtags was hashtag Save Childcare. And by using that hashtag, a lot of people are able to participate in conversations beyond just their normal networks and, click on it to find different resources and comments. And I know a handful of legislators also use those hashtags as well. Another opportunity is to write a letter to your legislator. So this is a little more of a time commitment. I would say 30 minutes to an hour to really flesh out your messaging and make sure you have a clear message before putting it in the mail or even email and pushing send. So this is a really good way to make your voice heard and share your views in a more formal way. You can either send it by mail or you can send it by email to the district offices. All of the links that I sent, all of the profiles and the link I sent you should have a messaging option to message your legislator and leave a message in their general inbox. So the legislative aides will be able to see that and then pass it off to the legislators to review and respond back to you. So a letter will not only allow you to share your opinions on current policies, investments, but provide you the opportunity to articulate a strong case that supports your opinions, share your involvement in early education system, and share additional resources that support your ask. So you can take that letter and switch out the names and send it both to your legislator, both of your legislators, so both your representative and senators. You don't have to change it much, but you can get out 2 messages to legislators and be just as effective in your advocacy. You can also write an op-ed or letter to the editor. So writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor takes a little more time than most other commitment or most other advocacy tools. In general, it takes 2 to 4 hours. Think of it as being a letter, but more in depth. And these are the things that you see in newspapers on the front pages or in the letters to the editor section. So it's an easy way to spread awareness about early learning to a broader audience. So this is a newsletter that is shared across the community. So it's not only effective in possibly catching the attention of legislators who are reading the newsletters, but also an effective way of captivating your local community around this issue as well. You can also utilize what's going on in our current space and build off of that. So for right now, we know that the workforce is in crisis. So using that current situation that a lot of people are paying attention to and building your story around that and submitting it to the newspaper is an effective way of tuning into current events and getting listeners or readers to follow you. And then op-eds are generally longer in length, whereas letters to the editor are usually less than 300 words. So letters to the editor are really easy to submit and get approved, whereas op-eds there's a little more of a vetted process with local media to get your op-ed in papers. And then finally, meeting with your legislator. This is a really important tool in getting out, your message by meeting one-on-one with your legislators. So you can either meet in person in the district, you can meet here at the State House. You can also meet virtually with your legislator too, as many of them have adapted to virtual meetings over the past year as well. In my opinion, they've been more accessible, it seems, over the past year because they are doing these virtual meetings and able to meet in between of going to different events and meetings and such. So when meeting with your legislator, like I said, it's always important to do a little background research on your legislator beforehand through using that tool I sent in the chat box, but also really developing a clear ask of what you are going in to meet with them about. So there is a little more prep time in terms of, trying to figure out what you want to talk about. But once you're in the meeting, things go rather quickly, and making sure that you have a plan going into the meeting is truly important. And as you can see on the screen, we actually hosted a few opportunities throughout the year to include roundtable discussions. So we pulled in members of the community to meet with legislators virtually who represent them. So we had multiple providers participate in these conversations, and it was a really great opportunity for a local community to come together as one and really tell them what's going on on the ground level. And you can certainly do that as well in your communities. After the meeting, write down what you learned. So, recapping what you learned and writing it down so you can refer back to later is really important. You can also share that you met with them on social media. A lot of the times after we meet with legislators, we'll post a picture of it and we'll post it on our social media page, where the legislators will often engage and either retweet or like it or comment about thanking us for meeting with them. And then what we like to do here at Groundwork is after meeting with a legislator, we always like to send a personal thank you note. So this can be an email form. However, we really like to send hard copy thank you notes that are handwritten. So we have little postcards that we'll write on after a meeting and send it that day, just thanking them and putting that personal touch on it. So be sure to always follow up with some form of thank you, though, just to express your gratitude for their time once again. And then it's also an opportunity to reiterate your ask and answer any questions that they may have had. And then just some final notes here. So meeting with legislative staff can be just as important. If you are, if a lot of the time legislators are running in between meetings and are unable to meet anymore because the conflict pops up, but meeting with a staffer can be just as effective, as they'll listen to you and they'll definitely get the message back to the legislator. And oftentimes they're the ones that are really organizing the legislators' efforts in the State House as well. So I think it's just as important. Be sure to always introduce yourself and let the legislator know who you are if you're a constituent, and share how you are affiliated with early education. Listen closely to those who you're meeting with. So are they understanding your case? Are they agreeing? Are they deflecting? Just trying to understand where they're coming from. And then, like I said, always making your ask clear is really important, and thanking them as well. But a lot of the times during legislator meetings, they might ask you questions that you don't have the answer to in the moment, and that's okay. You can always say, I don't know the answer to that, but I will get you an answer and follow up, and reach out to someone who does know the answer, find some resources that answers the questions, and then follow up with them. And it's a really good opportunity to just do that additional touch base afterwards. You can also host a site visit with your legislator. So you can do this by, inviting them to come to your space. So this takes a little more prep time, 3 to 5 hours. You might want to let your staff know that a legislator is coming to visit, but just taking them around the facilities to let them know and see what the day-to-day looks like you is really helpful to them. Like I said earlier, oftentimes they're very detached or far away from this. So just showing them again, what it looks like the everyday is helpful in understanding your story and what you are asking them to do. So they're able to see firsthand the importance of quality early learning and the workforce that supports our youngest learners. And while you're doing this, take pictures, record a video, whatever they agree to, allowing, whether it be a video or a photo, and then sharing that out on social media. It's just another way of continuing to be out there with the legislators. Okay, does anyone have any questions so far? I see a lot of people put in the chat box some things too, so I'm going to read that. Yeah, I love these little introductions. Fantastic. Okay, hearing no questions, I want to kind of end with understanding what your next steps are. So if you can just put in the chat box. Oh, go ahead, Judith.
Well, and if they would like to raise their hand, we can allow them to speak as well. That's an option.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sure. So my question to you is, one, do you have any questions about this presentation? But two being, what are your next steps? So how are you going to commit to advocacy? What are you going to do now having this information? So like Judith said, if you have any comments, just raise your hand and we can unmute you, and or you can put it in the chat box. And if you need to raise your hand, I believe there's a button at the bottom of your screen that says raise hand. And I know that we can turn on your mic from there. Okay, I see a chat. Okay, yeah, Karen, I see you. So over the spring during the budget, we did a 5-day advocacy challenge that I'm sure many of you participated in. And each day we had a different ask for participants to do to engage in advocacy. Let me see if I can pull that up and I can share it with you all just so you can see what Karen's talking about. Although it's complete now since the budget is over. It is a good tool to challenge yourself and kind of replicate to the different issues you're advocating for. Okay, here. Like I said, that the activities are closed now, but you can kind of see what we did, and maybe you can all do something to the effect that we did each of those 5 days. So I see as well, someone said, I would like to start following advocacy leaders via social media to get a clearer picture of their lens and point of view regarding ECE issues and trends. And yes, of course, Mindy, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint afterwards. One thing that I didn't share that might be helpful to you all as well. Let me go back to that link I sent you all earlier, because I see some of you want to engage in advocacy moving forward. One thing that you can do is you can also sign up for this feature down here called the My Ohio Legislator. So you would just create an account. I'll just sign in real quick so I can show you. From there, you'll be able to have a dashboard of all kinds of different activities you can track. You can track legislation here. You can track by number, you can track by subject. You also can get daily notifications of different bills that have come up that you may want to monitor. And you can track certain committees in the Ohio legislature as well. So I think this is a really helpful tool in just monitoring what's coming down the pike and how to get involved in the process. But I would definitely go to track by subject and add in one of the subject areas that are of interest to you, such as early childhood education being one of those. Well, that's a really easy tool to utilize and continue to monitor. Probably like most of us, I get so many emails. I pay close attention to the ones from Groundwork, OUIC, and NACI, and others for group advocacy efforts. Sometimes it's more doable to join the group effort, and there are strength in numbers. Yes, absolutely. And I agree. I want to get more college students involved too. So then I'm going to end on this screen real quick. So there's many ways you can get involved in advocacy. Like I said, use that tool that is in the chat box, that legislature tool. You can also register for our weekly newsletter. You can join our Ready, Set, Soar Ohio Prenatal to 3 Coalition here at Groundwork. You can also access and share resources, register for events and watch previous recordings. And lastly, just partner with us. I also want to mention, I don't have all the details to share with you all yet, but we will be announcing here the next month our 2022 cohort for Ohio Early Childhood Leadership Fellowship. And if you want to find out more information about that and when the applications are open, I would suggest registering for a newsletter. So after this, I'm going to pop in the chat box all these different links that are really helpful. So you can continue to stay engaged in the process. But I'm going to share one last video.
In this moment, our youngest children and families need us more than ever. Children only get one chance at childhood. The first 1,000 days of a child's life lay the groundwork for their healthy development and all of their later learning. Because of COVID-19, Ohio's most vulnerable children have spent 1/3 of those precious days enduring the stress, the trauma, and financial hardships that are overwhelming their families, caregivers, and communities. You know the stories that policymakers need to hear. Your voice can persuade them to support our youngest children and families. We need you to make this moment a movement.
When you start sharing your story, other people will listen.
Please know that your stories and hardships that you have endured during the pandemic is important. We must continue to call, write, and tweet.
One of the things I've done is made little postcards.
We've met with statewide representatives as well as went to the Capitol.
Start discussions with church family members, your neighbors.
And the stakes are too high for us not to act.
Let's make this moment a movement.
Let's make this moment a movement.
And let's make this moment a movement.
All right. Well, that's all I had for you all. Like I said, I'm about to pop in the chat box a ton of different links that will be helpful as you consider your advocacy moving forward and how to engage with us as well. Yeah, Michael Ingram. Yep, he was in there. All right, here we go. But if anyone has any final questions or comments or asks, I'm open to it. Otherwise, I'll hand it back over to you, Judith.
Yes, well, if anyone is definitely needing to add any questions, please go ahead and do so. But Joya, I definitely appreciate you joining us today. This is quite helpful. I think your organization and the advocates definitely helped us through this last budget cycle. And I'm sure there will be additional asks here in the near future and going forward. So we appreciate this. It's helpful to, if folks are new to this, getting that initial information, getting the refresher to make sure that we're ready to go when we need to be called on.
Yes, absolutely. And I dropped my email address in the chat box in case anyone wants to get a hold of me, if they have any additional questions or want to chat about anything. I am open. So just reach out to me anytime. And then I'm going to also, there's one more link about our leadership fellowship, although we have not put out official information yet on it, but stay tuned on that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.